The rain fell like bullets against the metal roof of the garage, each drop a percussion instrument in a chaotic symphony of storm and wind. Michael Hayes stood at the doorway, his weathered face illuminated by brief flashes of lightning that turned night into day for heartbeats at a time. His shoulders, still broad at 42, carried invisible weight. 20 years in the Marine Corps had taught him to read danger in the air. Tonight, the danger wasn't just in the storm. Sarah, his 10-year-old daughter, huddled near the barrel fire he had built in the center of the garage. Her small hands extended toward the flames, seeking warmth against the unusual October chill that had swept into Pinecrest, Oregon, along with the storm. The electricity had gone out an hour earlier, leaving the fire as their only source of heat and light. "Dad!" Her voice barely carried over the storm's fury. "Is it going to get worse?" Michael turned to answer, but his words died as a new sound cut through the tempest outside. The distinctive growl of motorcycle engines, not one but many approaching through the rain and darkness. The sound grew from distant thunder to imminent threat as headlights carved yellow paths through the downpour, illuminating the rain until it seemed like liquid gold falling from the sky. 15 motorcycles pulled into the gravel lot before his garage. Harley-Davidsons, their chrome dull with rain, and road grime, their riders soaked to the bone. On their backs, leather jackets displayed a snarling wolf with blood-red eyes above crossed bones. The Devil's Nomads Motorcycle Club. Michael recognized the insignia from police bulletins and newspaper stories. Nothing good followed where they rode. "Get back inside," Michael said quietly to Sarah, who had appeared at his side. She retreated without argument, sensing the tension in her father's posture. The lead rider cut his engine. The others followed suit. In the relative quiet that followed, Michael could hear doors opening across the street as neighbors peered out at the commotion. The leader removed his helmet, revealing a face perhaps 35 years old, with a thick beard and eyes that had seen too much. Something about those eyes tugged at Michael's memory, but he couldn't place it. "We need shelter," the man said simply. Rain cascaded off his beard as he spoke. "Just until the storm passes." Before Michael could respond, voices erupted from across the street. "Don't let them in, Hayes. It was Bill Thornton who ran the hardware store. Those are the Devil's Nomads, call the sheriff." Other voices joined in a chorus of fear and anger. Michael remained still, evaluating. These men were soaked through. The temperature was dropping. The next town was 30 miles away through mountain roads that would be treacherous in this weather. Red and blue lights flashed as Sheriff Jenkins' patrol car pulled up. The sheriff emerged, rain hat pulled low over his eyes, hand resting near his sidearm. "Everything all right here, Michael?" Jenkins asked, but his eyes never left the bikers. "Just some folks caught in the storm," Michael replied evenly. Jenkins moved closer, lowering his voice. "These aren't folks, Michael. These are the Devil's Nomads. Most have records. Some just got out of Sheridan Penitentiary. They've been causing trouble all up the coast. I can't make you turn them away from private property, but I strongly advise it. Think about Sarah." Michael felt the weight of the silver dog tags against his chest, hidden beneath his shirt. Hayes, Michael J. USMC, Opus Christian. And below that, the words that had guided him through the darkest places on earth: honor before fear. The biker leader watched this exchange with eyes that seemed to miss nothing. His men remained on their bikes, rain soaking them further with each passing moment. None complained. None moved to seek shelter elsewhere. They waited for their leader, and their leader waited for Michael. Sarah appeared in the doorway again, wrapped in a blanket. "Dad." Michael made his decision. He reached up and touched the dog tags through his shirt, feeling the raised letters of the words that had defined his life. Then he stepped aside, opening the door wider. "You look cold," he said to the biker leader. "Come in." The collective gasp from the neighbors across the street was audible even through the storm. Sheriff Jenkins shook his head slowly. "Your choice, Michael. I'll be patrolling all night if you need me." He returned to his cruiser and drove away, but not before giving the bikers a long, hard stare. The leader of the Nomads nodded once to Michael, a gesture of respect. "Marcus Stone," he said, introducing himself. Then he turned to his men. "We've got shelter, boys." One by one, 15 rain-soaked men in leather jackets, emblazoned with the Devil's Nomads insignia, filed into Michael's garage. They moved with the disciplined quiet of men accustomed to following orders. Michael noted this with professional interest. These weren't just thugs. There was organization here, structure. The last man entered, and Michael closed the door against the storm, acutely aware that he had just welcomed 15 strangers with criminal records into the space he shared with his daughter. Yet something deeper than logic had guided his decision. something in the leader's eyes, something in the way these men carried themselves through the rain. The garage was large, a former commercial repair shop that Michael had purchased after leaving the Marines. Tools lined the walls, projects in various states of completion occupied workbenches and floor space. The barrel fire in the center cast moving shadows across walls and faces, giving everything a surreal, almost mystical quality. The bikers stood awkwardly around the edges of the room, unsure of their welcome despite the open door. None approached the fire, though Michael could see several shivering. "The fire's for everyone," he said, simply gesturing to the barrel. Slowly, the men moved closer to the warmth. Michael studied them in the firelight. Their ages ranged from perhaps 25 to 50. Their faces told stories of hard lives, but their eyes told Michael something else, something that triggered recognition from his years in the Corps. These men had seen combat, not street fights or prison yards. War. Sarah, who had retreated to a corner when the men entered, now approached carrying a large pot. She had been heating soup on a camping stove in the back room. Without a word, she began ladling the simple chicken soup into paper cups and offering them to the surprised bikers. When she reached Marcus Stone, he took the cup with both hands as if receiving something precious. He stared down into the steaming liquid, and Michael saw his jaw tighten. A single tear tracked down his weathered face, disappearing into his beard. "No one's offered me soup in years," Marcus said quietly, the words meant for Sarah but carrying in the hushed garage. "Thank you, little lady." Sarah smiled shyly and continued distributing cups to the remaining men. Each accepted with murmured thanks, the simple act of kindness seeming to disarm them more effectively than any show of force could have. Michael kept a watchful eye on his daughter as she moved among the bikers, but he saw nothing in their behavior to concern him. If anything, they treated her with an almost reverent respect, making space for her small form, accepting her offerings with genuine gratitude. The soup distributed, Sarah returned to Michael's side. "Can I get more blankets for them?" she whispered. "Good idea." Michael nodded, touched by his daughter's compassion. She disappeared into the back rooms and returned with an armload of blankets, which she began distributing to the men furthest from the fire. A loud pounding on the garage door interrupted the quiet scene. Michael opened it to find a small crowd of townspeople huddled under umbrellas in the rain. At the front stood Bill Thornton from the hardware store and Karen Winters from the town council. "Michael, we need to talk," Karen said, her voice tight with restraint. "Privately." Michael stepped outside, pulling the door closed behind him. Rain immediately soaked through his shirt, but he stood straight, facing the gathered crowd. "What's this about?" he asked, though he knew perfectly well. "You've got to send those men away," Karen said. "They're dangerous criminals. The whole town is talking about it. People are afraid to sleep in their homes tonight with those thugs here." "They're just waiting out the storm," Michael replied calmly. "They'll be gone by morning." Bill Thornton stepped forward, rain dripping from his baseball cap. "My sister lives in Rockport. The Devil's Nomads came through there last month. There was a bar fight, 3 people hospitalized, property destroyed." Murmurs of agreement rippled through the small crowd. Michael looked from face to face, seeing neighbors he'd known for 5 years since moving to Pinecrest after his discharge. People who waved to him on the street, people who brought their cars to him for repair, people who called him for help when something heavy needed moving or a fence needed fixing. People who had never fully accepted him as one of their own. "I understand your concern," Michael said carefully, "but I've made my decision. These men are my guests until the storm passes." "Your guests?" Karen's voice rose in disbelief. "Michael Hayes, there are children in this town, families. What about our safety?" "What about their safety?" Michael countered, gesturing toward the garage. "It's 40 degrees and dropping. The mountain roads are washing out. Would you have them ride through that?" "Yes, if it keeps our town safe," someone called from the back of the crowd. Michael felt a cold anger rise within him, different from the hot rage of battle. This was the slow, steady burn of disappointment. "I thought this town believed in Christian charity," he said quietly, "in helping strangers in need." "Don't you dare preach to us about charity," Karen snapped. "Those aren't lost lambs in there, they're wolves, and you've invited them right into our midst." "You're putting your own daughter at risk," Bill added, his finger jabbing the air for emphasis. Michael's expression hardened. "My daughter is safer with me than anywhere else on earth. I've faced worse threats than wet bikers looking for shelter." "You're making a mistake, Hayes," Karen said, her voice dropping to a threatening tone. "The town won't forget this." The implication was clear. Business would dry up. Social invitations would cease. The arm's-length acceptance they had granted the quiet Marine veteran and his daughter would be withdrawn entirely. Michael touched the dog tags under his shirt again. Honor before fear. 5 years ago, he had made a choice that cost lives. Tonight, he was making a choice that might cost him his place in this community. Both decisions came from the same core belief. "I appreciate your concern," he said finally, "but my decision stands. Good night." He turned and went back inside, closing the door on their protests. The bikers looked up as he entered, their expressions questioning. They had heard enough to understand the situation. "We can leave," Marcus said, standing up from where he had been crouching by the fire. "We don't want to cause you trouble with your neighbors." Michael shook his head. "You're not the problem. Their fear is." The simple statement hung in the air. Several of the bikers exchanged glances, reassessing the quiet mechanic who had given them shelter against community pressure. Sarah, who had been arranging blankets near the back of the garage, approached her father. "Dad, why are they afraid? These men haven't done anything wrong." Michael looked down at his daughter, seeing in her innocent question the heart of so many conflicts he had witnessed around the world. "People fear what they don't understand, Sarah. And when we're afraid, we sometimes make the wrong decisions. Like in Afghanistan," she asked, her voice lowered but still audible in the quiet garage. "When you had to choose." Michael felt the room's attention focus on him more sharply. He hadn't told Sarah many stories from his deployments, but she knew about his final mission. The choice that had ended his career but saved civilians. He wondered suddenly if this was why he had opened his door tonight. A subconscious attempt at redemption. "Something like that," he answered softly. A young biker with a scar running along his jaw spoke up from near the fire. "Afghanistan, you served there." "3 tours," Michael replied simply. "Helmand Province, mostly." The atmosphere in the garage subtly shifted. Several of the men sat straighter, their expressions changing from guarded to evaluative. They were looking at him with new eyes. "Marines?" asked an older biker with gray streaks in his beard. Michael nodded. 3rd Battalion, 5th Marines. "Dark Horse," the older biker said, naming the unit's nickname. "Respect, brother. I was Army. 10th Mountain Division." Other voices joined in. "Navy here, served on the Roosevelt during Operation Enduring Freedom. Air Force Pararescue, 2 tours. Rangers, got out in 2015. One by one, nearly every man in the room identified himself as a veteran. Michael's suspicion was confirmed. The Devil's Nomads, at least this chapter, were predominantly former military. Men who had served their country and returned to find themselves unable to fit back into civilian society. Men who had found brotherhood on the road when they couldn't find it at home. Marcus Stone watched this exchange without contributing. His eyes never left Michael's face, as if searching for something. Recognition, perhaps, or judgment, or... Sarah looked around the room with newfound understanding. "You're all soldiers like my dad." "We were," the older biker corrected gently. "Now we're just men trying to find our way home." The poetic simplicity of his statement hung in the air, carrying more truth than elaborate explanations could have. Sarah nodded, accepting this. "Dad was a hero," she said proudly. "He saved people when he wasn't supposed to." Michael felt heat rise to his face. "Sarah, that's enough. These men don't need to hear my stories." "Maybe we do," Marcus said suddenly, his deep voice cutting through the awkward moment. He stepped closer to Michael, studying his face in the firelight. "Hayes, Michael Hayes, Helmand Province." The way he said it made it clear this wasn't just repetition, it was recognition. Michael felt a chill that had nothing to do with the rain or cold. He looked more closely at Marcus Stone, trying to place him. The beard and the years made it difficult, but something in the eyes. "Kajaki Village," Marcus continued, his voice dropping. "Spring 2010. The name hit Michael like a physical blow. Kajaki. A routine patrol turned into an ambush. Civilians caught in the crossfire. Impossible choices made under fire. "You were there?" Michael asked, his voice barely audible. Marcus nodded slowly. "I was your radio operator, Sergeant Hayes." The world seemed to stop. The garage, the storm, the angry neighbors all faded into background noise as Michael stared at the man before him. Memories flooded back, sharp and painful. The weight of a bleeding Marine on his shoulders. The sound of children screaming. The impossible choice between mission parameters and human lives. "Stone," Michael said, finally the name coming back to him. "Lance Corporal Marcus Stone." "The same," Marcus confirmed, a ghost of a smile lifting his beard. "Though I made it to corporal before they discharged me. Medical. Shrapnel never did come all the way out." Without thinking, Michael reached toward Marcus's left side, where he remembered the wound being. He stopped himself before making contact, but Marcus nodded in confirmation. Still aches when it rains, he said, which is why your dry garage feels like the Ritz-Carlton right now. The other bikers watched this exchange in silence, sensing its importance, but not interrupting. Sarah looked between the two men, putting pieces together with a child's intuitive understanding. You know each other, she said, not a question. We served together, Michael confirmed, still trying to process the coincidence. No, not coincidence. Afghanistan veterans weren't so numerous that running into one was miraculous. But this particular Marine from that particular day, your father saved my life, Marcus told Sarah directly, and the lives of a dozen Afghan civilians. When the Taliban had us pinned down, when command ordered us to withdraw and leave the civilians behind, your father made a different call. Michael felt exposed, suddenly vulnerabilities laid bare before his daughter in a garage full of strangers. We should get some rest, he said, changing the subject. It's late, and tomorrow will be a long day. Marcus seemed about to say more, but stopped himself, respecting Michael's obvious discomfort. Instead, he turned to his men. You heard the man. Rack out. Standard watch rotation. Jameson, you're first up. 2 hours, then wake Martinez. The bikers moved with military precision, finding spaces along the walls and workbenches, settling down with blankets and jackets for pillows. One man positioned himself near the door, alert and watchful without being instructed further. Michael led Sarah to the small apartment attached to the rear of the garage where they lived. It was humble but comfortable, with 2 bedrooms, a kitchenette, and a small living area. He checked the locks on the connecting door out of habit, though he sensed no threat from the men in his garage. Dad, Sarah asked as he tucked her into bed, why did you help them when everyone else wanted you to send them away? Michael considered the question carefully. Because sometimes doing the right thing isn't the same as doing the easy thing. Sometimes honor requires courage. Like your dog tags say, she nodded sagely. Honor before fear. That's right, he smiled, smoothing her hair. Now get some sleep. The storm will be over by morning. After Sarah was asleep, Michael returned quietly to the garage. Most of the bikers were sleeping or pretending, to their forms dark lumps against the walls. Marcus sat by the fire, which had burned down to glowing coals. The biker on watch nodded respectfully to Michael, but maintained his vigilance by the door. Michael took a seat opposite Marcus, the dying fire between them, casting their faces in orange light and deep shadow. For a long while, neither spoke, content to listen to the rain drumming on the metal roof and the occasional rumble of thunder in the distance. I never got to thank you, Marcus said finally, his voice low enough not to disturb the sleeping men. After Kayaki, they medevaced me out. By the time I was coherent again, you'd been rotated back to the States. Michael stared into the embers. Nothing to thank me for. I did what any Marine would do. Marcus snorted softly. That's bullshit, and you know it. Command ordered withdrawal. You countermanded that order to save civilians. You risked your career. Hell, you risked court-martial. I risked my men, Michael corrected, the old guilt surfacing. That's what kept me up at night, not the brass in their paperwork. We all knew the risk, Marcus insisted. Every one of us would have made the same call. Those were children in that village haze, families. Michael didn't respond immediately. The weight of command decisions never truly lifted, no matter how many years passed. He had led men into danger. Some hadn't come back. The fact that he had done so for the right reasons didn't lighten that burden. They offered you the Silver Star. Marcus said, not a question, but a statement. Word got around even in the hospital. You turned it down. Michael nodded, once uncomfortable with the direction of the conversation. Didn't feel right to take a medal for disobeying orders, even if those orders were wrong. Honor before fear, Marcus said softly. Michael looked up sharply. How do you know that? Your dog tags, Marcus explained. I saw them once when we were on patrol. Always wondered if that was something they put on all Marine tags or if it was special to you. My father had it engraved on his tags, Michael said after a moment. When I enlisted, he gave me his old tags and had new ones made for me with the same words. Marcus nodded thoughtfully. Good words to live by. They fell silent again. Outside, the storm's fury had lessened somewhat, though rain still fell steadily. Michael checked his watch, nearly 2 in the morning. Your daughter, Marcus said suddenly. She's a good kid, brave. Too brave sometimes. Michael smiled faintly. Like her mother. Is she? Cancer, 5 years ago, Michael supplied before Marcus could finish the awkward question. Sarah was 5. We just moved here. Marcus nodded solemnly. I'm sorry, my wife left while I was deployed. Couldn't handle the uncertainty, she said. Took our daughter with her. I haven't seen either of them in 8 years. The simple tragedy of this statement hung in the air between them. Michael thought of saying something sympathetic, but knew no words could touch such loss. Instead, he asked a different question. How did you end up with the nomads? Marcus looked around at his sleeping men, his expression softening. After my discharge, I tried to make civilian life work. Got a job as a security guard, had an apartment, went to the VA for therapy, did everything by the book. His face hardened. Then the nightmares got worse. Started drinking, lost the job, lost the apartment, spent 6 months living in my car. Michael nodded, understanding all too well how quickly a veteran could spiral downward without proper support. One night, I'm at this roadside bar, about as low as a man can get, thinking about eating my pistol. Marcus continued, his voice dropping further. This group of bikers comes in. Turns out most of them are vets. Different branches, different wars, same problems. They recognize something in me, I guess. Offer me a place to stay, then a motorcycle, then a patch. He gestured to the Devil's Nomad's insignia on his jacket, which hung drying near the fire. The club saved my life, Marcus said simply. Gave me back what I lost when I left the Corps. Purpose, brotherhood, structure. And the criminal records, Michael asked, not accusingly but directly. Marcus met his gaze without flinching. Some are from before, troubled kids who found discipline in the military then lost it when they got out. Some are from bar fights, some from being in the wrong place, wrong time. We're not angels, Hayes, but we're not devils either, despite the patch. Michael weighed this answer, finding honesty in it. He had seen enough of the world to know that good men sometimes found themselves on the wrong side of the law, while criminals sometimes wore badges and uniforms. Get some rest, Michael said, finally standing up. Tomorrow's likely to be interesting given how the neighbors feel. Marcus nodded, stretching out beside the dying fire. We've faced worse than small-town disapproval. Michael returned to his apartment, checking on Sarah before retiring to his own room. He lay awake for a long time, listening to the storm and thinking about the strange turns life could take. How a routine patrol in Afghanistan could alter the course of multiple lives. How a storm in Oregon could bring those lives back into intersection years later. His last thought before sleep claimed him was of the angry faces of his neighbors. Tomorrow would indeed be interesting. He had no way of knowing just how prophetic that thought would prove to be. Outside, as Michael slept, the 15 motorcycles of the Devil's Nomads stood silent sentinel in the rain. And across the street, neighbors peered through curtains at the garage that had become in their minds a harbor for dangerous men. Phones rang as calls were made, messages were sent, social media posts circulated. By morning, the entire town of Pinecrest would know that Michael Hayes had welcomed the Devil's Nomads into their midst. The storm outside was passing, but the storm of human emotion was just beginning to gather force. Dawn broke reluctantly over Pinecrest, the sun struggling to pierce clouds that hung low and heavy with the remnants of the night's storm. The rain had stopped, but water still dripped from eaves and branches, and puddles mirrored the gray sky in driveways and along the town's main street. Michael Hayes woke before sunrise, a habit ingrained by 20 years in the Marine Corps. For a moment, he lay still, listening to the sounds around him. The patter of water from the roof, the distant rumble of thunder moving eastward over the mountains, the soft breathing of his daughter Sarah in the next room. And something else, the low murmur of voices from the garage. The events of the previous night returned to him. The storm, the 15 Devil's Nomads bikers seeking shelter, the angry neighbors, and most startling of all, the discovery that the leader of the Nomads was Lance Corporal Marcus Stone, a Marine whose life Michael had saved in Afghanistan. Michael dressed quickly and silently, years of practice, allowing him to move without disturbing Sarah. In the small bathroom, he paused to look at his reflection. The face that looked back at him was weathered but not old-lined around the eyes from squinting into desert suns and sea glare. His hair, once regulation short brown, now showed flecks of gray at the temples. His eyes, though, remained unchanged. Clear, direct, and carrying a depth of experience most civilians found disconcerting. Around his neck hung the dog tags that had been his father's and now were his. Hayes, Michael J. USMC OPOS Christian. And below that, the words that had guided 3 generations of Hayes men through war, honor before fear. He tucked the tags inside his shirt and went to check on his unexpected guests. The garage was surprisingly orderly. The bikers had folded their borrowed blankets into neat stacks. The barrel where the fire had burned was cool, now the ashes contained. Several of the men were already awake, moving with the quiet efficiency of those accustomed to shared quarters and early mornings. Marcus Stone sat on an overturned crate cleaning a disassembled pistol with practiced movements. He looked up as Michael entered. "Hope we didn't wake you," he said, his voice pitched low. Michael shook his head. "I'm usually up by 5. Old habits." Marcus nodded in understanding. He reassembled the pistol with quick, sure movements and tucked it away inside his leather jacket. "We'll be rolling out as soon as everyone's up. Roads should be passable now." Michael walked to the garage's main door and opened it a few inches, surveying the scene outside. The storm had left debris scattered across the street. A large branch had fallen across power lines 2 blocks down, explaining the continued lack of electricity. And parked across the street, engine idling and headlights on despite the growing daylight, was Sheriff Jenkins' patrol car. "You've got company," Marcus observed, having moved silently to Michael's shoulder. "So it seems," Michael replied. He opened the door fully and stepped outside into the damp morning air. Sheriff Jenkins climbed out of his cruiser and crossed the street, his gait unhurried but purposeful. His uniform was crisp despite the early hour, his expression carefully neutral beneath the brim of his department-issue hat. "Morning, Michael," he called, stopping a respectful distance away. Sheriff Michael acknowledged with a nod. "Early patrol. You could say that." Jenkins glanced past Michael to where Marcus stood framed in the garage doorway. "Just checking that everything's still peaceful." "All quiet," Michael assured him. "They're getting ready to leave." Jenkins nodded, seemingly relieved. "That's good. That's real good." He hesitated, then added in a lower voice, "There's some concern in town this morning. Calls coming into the station. People worried about having the nomads here." Michael felt a familiar tightening in his chest, the quiet anger that always accompanied unjust judgment. "They're just men, Tom, most of them veterans. They needed shelter from the storm and they got it. End of story." "Veterans?" Jenkins raised an eyebrow in surprise. "Most of them," Michael confirmed. "Marines, Army, Navy, Air Force. They served their country same as I did." The sheriff absorbed this information, his expression thoughtful. "Well, that's unexpected." He glanced again at Marcus, reassessing. "Still their reputation?" "Sometimes reputations don't tell the whole story," Michael interrupted. "You know that better than most." Jenkins had his own history in Pinecrest, a mistake made years ago that still followed him despite years of exemplary service. He looked away, acknowledging the point without verbally conceding it. "Fair enough," he said finally. "But Michael, you should know. There's talk. Karen Winters was on the phone half the night. The town council's meeting this morning. Emergency session." He hesitated, clearly uncomfortable with what he had to say next. "Some of the things being said about you." "I'm not concerned with gossip," Michael cut him off. Jenkins sighed. "You should be. This isn't a big city where people mind their own business. This is Pinecrest, population 1,200. Words have power here." Before Michael could respond, a new sound joined the morning quiet. Motorcycles, but not starting up inside his garage. These were approaching from down the street, at least 5 or 6 from the sound of them. Both men turned to look as a group of riders rounded the corner and came into view. They wore leather jackets similar to those of the Devil's Nomads, but with different insignia. A serpent coiled around a dagger. The Vipers, a rival club known for their particularly violent approach to territorial disputes. "Ah, hell," Jenkins muttered instinctively, shifting his hand closer to his sidearm. This day just got complicated. Marcus appeared at Michael's side, his posture alert but controlled. "We've got incoming," he said quietly. Behind him, several nomads had moved to the garage door, drawn by the sound of the approaching motorcycles. "I see them," Michael replied. To Jenkins, he added, "This your jurisdiction, Sheriff." Jenkins straightened his shoulders. "Unfortunately." He stepped forward to place himself between the approaching bikers and Michael's garage. Official, authoritative, but one man standing against what were now clearly 8 motorcycles rolling to a stop in the middle of the street. The leader of the Vipers was a massive man with a shaved head and arms covered in tattoos that extended up his neck and onto his scalp. He cut his engine and dismounted his movements, suggesting barely contained aggression. His gaze passed dismissively over Jenkins and fixed on Marcus. "Well, well," the Viper said, his voice a graveled rumble. "Marcus Stone and his little lost lambs. Long way from your usual hunting grounds, aren't you?" Marcus remained impassive. "Just passing through Razor. No trouble wanted." Razor laughed, a sound without humor. "No trouble wanted," he mimicked. "That's rich coming from you, especially after what happened in Rockport." Jenkins stepped forward. "Whatever grievances you gentlemen have, they don't get settled in my town. If you're passing through, keep passing." Razor turned his attention to the sheriff, sizing him up with contempt. This doesn't concern you, Badge. This is club business. Everything that happens in Pinecrest concerns me, Jenkins replied, his voice level but carrying steel. And this looks an awful lot like potential disturbing the peace. The standoff stretched, tension mounting. Michael assessed the situation with the calm calculation of a combat veteran. 8 Vipers versus 15 Nomads should have been a deterrent based on numbers alone, but the Vipers were known for carrying weapons more lethal than fists. The sheriff was armed, but wouldn't stand a chance if this erupted into violence. And most concerning of all, Sarah was still asleep just 30 yards away. A small crowd had begun to gather across the street. Neighbors initially drawn by the commotion, now watching with a mixture of fear and morbid fascination. Michael recognized Bill Thornton and Karen Winters among them. Perfect, he thought grimly, an audience for whatever came next. Inside the garage, the rest of the Nomads had awakened. Michael could sense them gathering behind him, a mounting force of potential violence held in check only by Marcus's command. We're leaving town now, Marcus stated firmly to Razor. We've got no business with the Vipers today. Razor smiled, revealing a gold tooth. Running scared stone. That's not like you. Must be getting soft in your old age. Before Marcus could reply, the garage apartment door opened and Sarah emerged, rubbing sleep from her eyes. She froze when she saw the tableau before her father and Marcus facing down a group of threatening bikers, the sheriff standing between them, and a crowd of townspeople watching from across the street. Dad, she called uncertainly. Michael felt his heart constrict. Go back inside, Sarah, he said, keeping his voice steady and calm. Everything's fine. Razor's gaze shifted to Sarah, and his smile widened unpleasantly. Well, now, what do we have here? A little princess. Didn't know you were playing House Hayes. Michael took a deliberate step forward, placing himself directly between Razor and his daughter's line of sight. When he spoke, his voice had changed, carrying the cold authority that had once commanded men in battle. My daughter is not part of this conversation. Look at her again, and we're going to have a serious problem. The threat was unmistakable. Razor's smile faded as he reassessed Michael, recognizing the coiled readiness of a trained fighter. For the first time, he seemed to register that Hayes might be more than just a garage owner harboring Nomads. The tension was broken by the sudden arrival of another vehicle. A Pinecrest Fire Department SUV pulled up, and Chief Ray Blackburn stepped out. At 60, Blackburn was the most respected figure in town, a veteran who had served as fire chief for 25 years. What's all this then? Blackburn called as he approached, his weathered face set in lines of disapproval. Tom, you need assistance. Jenkins looked relieved at the reinforcement, especially from someone with Blackburn's stature. Just explaining to these gentlemen that Pinecrest isn't the place for their personal disagreements. Blackburn surveyed the scene with experienced eyes. He nodded to Michael, whom he knew from various town emergency preparedness meetings, then turned his full attention to Razor. Son, he said, and somehow the word carried both authority and dismissal. I don't know what your business is, but I know trouble when I see it brewing. Now, our sheriff here is being polite. I'm not required to be so diplomatic. You either roll those machines out of my town right now, or I'll have every volunteer firefighter in Pinecrest here in 5 minutes. And trust me, they're a lot less understanding than Sheriff Jenkins. The implied threat might have seemed empty coming from a fire chief, but something in Blackburn's demeanor made it clear he was not bluffing. Razor hesitated, then spat on the ground. This isn't over, Stone, he growled. We'll finish our Rockport discussion another time. He glanced at Michael. You picked the wrong friend's garage, man. With that, he signaled to his crew. Engines roared to life and the Vipers executed tight turns before accelerating away, their departure as abrupt as their arrival. Blackburn watched them go, then turned to Marcus. Devil's Nomads, he observed, noting the insignia on Marcus's jacket. You boys have a reputation. Marcus met the older man's gaze steadily. Not all of it earned, sir. Blackburn considered this. Maybe not, but reputations cast long shadows. He looked at Michael. You all right here, Hayes? Anything you need. We're fine, Chief, Michael assured him. Thanks for stepping in. Blackburn nodded. Saw the commotion on my way to check storm damage. Figured Tom might appreciate some backup. He looked at the crowd still gathered across the street. Folks might want to disperse now, show's over. The neighbors didn't immediately leave, but the arrival of additional vehicles drawing their attention. 2 large pickup trucks pulled up, driven by other residents Michael recognized as local business owners. They parked deliberately, blocking any clear view of Michael's garage from the street, creating a buffer between the lingering spectators and the bikers. The drivers Ron Miller from the hardware store and Dave Chen, who owned the local diner, approached on foot. Both were veterans themselves, Ron having served in Desert Storm and Dave in Iraq. Thought you might want some privacy while your guests prepare to depart, Ron said to Michael, keeping his voice low. Michael understood immediately. These men, fellow veterans, were providing tactical support, creating a screen between the nomads and the town's curious eyes. The gesture spoke volumes about the quiet solidarity that existed among those who had served, regardless of other differences. Appreciated, Michael replied with a nod. Dave glanced at the nomads visible in the garage doorway. Heard through the grapevine these fellows are vets, he said, not asking but confirming. Most of them, Michael acknowledged. Dave nodded thoughtfully. Town's got its collective shorts in a twist, but don't let it bother you. Not everyone feels that way. He looked directly at Marcus. Safe travels when you head out. Marcus seemed momentarily taken aback by the civil treatment, but recovered quickly. Thank you, sir. As Dave and Ron stepped away to maintain their blocking positions, Sheriff Jenkins approached Michael once more. Crisis averted for now, he said quietly. But Michael, you should know. Karen Winters is on the town council. She's not your biggest fan today, and she has influence. Meaning, Michael prompted, though he could guess what was coming. Jenkins looked uncomfortable. Meaning there might be consequences for your business, for how welcome Sarah feels at school. I'm not saying it's right, just that it's possible. Michael absorbed this. He had built a life here in Pinecrest over the past 5 years, a business that supported himself and Sarah, a home. Not many friends perhaps, but acceptance. Clients who respected his work, teachers who praised Sarah's intelligence and good manners. All of that now potentially at risk because he had opened his door to strangers in a storm. Yet even knowing the potential cost he couldn't imagine having made a different choice. Some principles couldn't be compromised regardless of consequence. I understand, he told Jenkins. Thanks for the warning. Jenkins studied him a moment longer, then sighed. You're a stubborn man, Hayes. So I've been told, Michael replied with the ghost of a smile. Inside the garage, the nomads were preparing to leave, gathering their few possessions and making final preparations to their motorcycles. Sarah had returned from the apartment carrying a large thermos. I made coffee, she announced to no one in particular. For the road. Marcus looked at the girl with genuine appreciation. That's thoughtful of you, Miss Hayes. Thank you. Sarah beamed at the formal address, then proceeded to fill disposable cups for any biker who wanted some. The simple, civilized ritual of coffee being served and accepted created a moment of normalcy amid the tension of the morning. Michael watched his daughter move confidently among these rough men, showing neither fear nor judgment. At 10 years old, she saw more clearly than many adults in town. People, not labels, need not reputation. It reminded him of her mother who had possessed the same clear-eyed compassion. As the bikers finished their coffee and made final preparations to depart, Marcus approached Michael. We've taken up enough of your hospitality, he said. It's time we moved on. But before we go, he hesitated, seeming to debate with himself, then continued. There's something I think you should see. He led Michael outside to where the motorcycles were parked in neat formation. Behind each bike, secured with bungee cords and straps, Michael now noticed supplies that hadn't been visible in the darkness and rain of the previous night. Sandbags, coils of rope, folding shovels, chainsaws, tarps, first aid kits, all the equipment needed for emergency response and cleanup. We were headed to Grantsville, Marcus explained. They got hit worse than you did here. Flood warnings all up the valley. We've been doing this since the big California wildfires 3 years ago. Riding to disaster areas, helping with cleanup, rescue, whatever's needed. Michael took in this information, pieces clicking into place. Your disaster relief. Marcus shrugged. Unofficial, unaffiliated. We just show up and help out. No paperwork, no red tape. And no recognition, Michael observed. We're not looking for medals, Marcus replied with a meaningful look at Michael that referenced their earlier conversation about the Silver Star he had declined. Some of us just need to be useful again, to serve something bigger than ourselves. Michael nodded, understanding completely. Many veterans struggled to find purpose after leaving the structured, mission-oriented environment of the military. What Marcus described was a way to recapture that sense of meaning of being part of a team with a clear objective. But looking at the town this morning, Marcus continued surveying the debris-scattered streets and damaged properties visible from their vantage point. I'm thinking maybe Grantsville can wait. Seems like Pinecrest could use some help too. Michael followed his gaze, seeing the town through new eyes. Several houses had lost shingles. The Peterson place, 2 doors down, had a tree leaning precariously against the roof. Old Mrs. Wilson's entire front porch had collapsed. The community center's sign had been torn free and now lay across the entrance steps. "What are you suggesting?" Michael asked, though he already knew. Marcus turned to face him directly. "Let us help Hayes. Before we go, let us show this town what the devil's nomads really are." The proposition hung in the air between them. Michael considered the potential consequences. The town was already wary of the nomads. Having them stay longer, become more visible, might only increase tensions. But the need was real, the damage significant. And there was something else, something Michael recognized from his years commanding Marines: the need to correct misperceptions through action rather than words. Before he could respond, Sarah emerged from the garage carrying a large paper bag. "I made sandwiches," she announced, lifting the bag. "Peanut butter and jelly, in case anyone gets hungry while they're traveling." Michael looked at his daughter, then at Marcus and the waiting nomads, then at the damaged town beyond. He made his decision. "I think we might need those sandwiches here," he told Sarah. "These gentlemen have offered to help clean up after the storm." Sarah's face lit up. "Really, they're staying?" Marcus smiled, one of the few genuine smiles Michael had seen from him. "For a little while, Miss Hayes, if your father approves." Michael nodded once decisive. "I do." Across the street, the gathered neighbors had grown in number, despite Blackburn's earlier suggestion to disperse. Now they watched with undisguised suspicion as the bikers did not depart, but instead began unloading their emergency supplies and organizing them on the ground before the garage. Marcus called his men together and laid out the situation with crisp military efficiency. "Change of plans. We're conducting relief operations here before moving on to Grantsville. Hayes has agreed to let us stage from his garage. Standard protocols, teams of 3, full visibility, no confrontations with locals regardless of provocation. We're here to help, not make statements. Clear." "Clear," came the unified response, reminding Michael forcefully of Marines acknowledging orders. Marcus turned to Michael. "You know this town. Where do we start?" Michael considered. "The community center hosts the senior lunch program. They'll need to be operational by tomorrow. Mrs. Wilson on Elm Street is 85 and lives alone. Her porch collapse means she can't safely exit her house. The elementary school probably took damage to the playground equipment, and the Peterson place has a tree issue that looks critical." Marcus nodded, absorbing the information and priorities. "4 teams then. Jensen, you take Tucker and Rodriguez to the community center. Briggs, Alvarez, Washington to the school. Miller, you've got construction experience. Take Davis and Young to the elderly lady's house. I'll handle the tree situation with Jackson and Cooper." He looked around at his men. "Stay on comms. Report any issues immediately. We're guests here, remember that." The bikers broke into their assigned groups and began gathering appropriate equipment from the supplies they had unloaded. Michael was struck by the military precision of their operation. These weren't disorganized thugs. This was a well-drilled unit executing a mission. "I'd like to help too," he told Marcus. "I know every property in this town. I've worked on most of them at some point." "Could use your expertise," Marcus agreed readily. "You've got tools here that might come in handy too." Sarah tugged at Michael's sleeve. "Can I help too, Dad?" "Please." Michael hesitated. He wanted to keep Sarah close, especially given the lingering tension in town. But he also recognized the teaching opportunity here, the chance to show his daughter that helping others sometimes meant facing disapproval. "Yes," he decided, "but you stay with me or with Marcus at all times. Understood?" "Understood," Sarah agreed eagerly. As the teams prepared to deploy to their assigned locations, Sheriff Jenkins approached once more. "What's happening here, Michael?" he asked, his tone carefully neutral, but his expression concerned. "Community service," Michael replied simply. "The nomads have experience with disaster relief. They're going to help clean up some of the storm damage before they move on." Jenkins looked skeptical. "Is that wise, given the current sentiment in town?" "Sentiment can change," Michael said. "Actions speak louder than rumors." The sheriff appeared unconvinced but didn't argue further. "I'll be keeping an eye on things," he said instead. "Not because I expect trouble from your friends," he added, when Michael's expression hardened, "but because others might try to create it." With that cryptic warning, he returned to his patrol car and drove slowly away, presumably to monitor the other nomad teams as they dispersed throughout town. "He's right," Marcus observed after Jenkins had gone. "Not everyone will welcome our help." "Their loss," Michael replied. He turned to his daughter. "Sarah, why don't you go put on your work jeans and boots? We've got a busy day ahead." As Sarah ran to change, the nomads began moving out to their assigned tasks. Michael noticed that across the street, the gathered neighbors were talking among themselves, some gesturing animatedly toward the bikers. Karen Winters appeared to be holding court in the center of the group, her expression severe. "Your neighbors don't look happy," Marcus noted, following Michael's gaze. "They'll get over it," Michael replied, though he wasn't entirely convinced. Small towns had long memories and Pinecrest was smaller than most. Within 30 minutes, all four teams were deployed and working. Michael, Sarah, Marcus, and two other nomads tackled the precarious tree at the Peterson place. The elderly couple who lived there were initially alarmed to find devil's nomads on their property, but warmed considerably when the bikers addressed them as sir and ma'am and demonstrated professional knowledge of how to safely remove the damaged tree without further harm to the house. Word began to spread through town. The devil's nomads weren't leaving. They were helping. Some residents locked their doors as bikers passed. Others watched cautiously from windows. A few, mainly fellow veterans who had heard about the nomads' military backgrounds, came out to offer assistance or refreshments. At the Wilson house, the nomad construction team had completely removed the collapsed porch by mid-morning and were already framing a new, stronger structure. Old Mrs. Wilson, initially terrified of the leather-clad men on her property, was now sitting in a lawn chair supervising their work and offering unsolicited advice while serving them homemade lemonade. The team at the elementary school had cleared dangerous debris from the playground and were reinforcing a damaged swing set, much to the delight of several teachers who had come to assess the damage in preparation for Monday classes. At the community center, the largest team of nomads had not only cleared the fallen sign, but discovered roof damage that would have caused serious leaks during the next rainfall. They were patching it properly under the astonished gaze of Center Director Marge Holloway, who had initially called the sheriff when she saw bikers approaching her building. Throughout town, the pattern repeated, initial fear and suspicion giving way to cautious acceptance as the nomads demonstrated competence, respectfulness, and a genuine desire to help. Not everyone was convinced. Karen Winters and her closest allies maintained a stiff opposition, watching from a distance and making phone calls that Michael suspected were to town council members and other influential residents. By early afternoon, Michael and Marcus's team had safely removed the tree threatening the Peterson home and moved on to help clear a blocked drainage ditch that was causing flooding along Oak Street. Sarah worked alongside them, carrying smaller branches and helping to pass tools, her face smudged with dirt, but beaming with pride at being included in the important work. "Your daughter's a natural," Marcus observed during a water break. "Marine material." Michael smiled. "Don't let her hear you say that. She'll be asking for enlistment papers tomorrow." "Could do worse," Marcus shrugged. "Corps gave me a purpose, structure, skills. Also nearly got you killed in Kayaki," Michael reminded him. Marcus grew serious. "That day's been on my mind since I recognized you last night." He took a long drink of water, seeming to gather his thoughts. "There's something I never told you, something I couldn't tell you then." Michael waited, sensing the importance of what was coming. "That village," Marcus continued, his voice dropping, "the one with the civilians you insisted on saving against orders. My sister-in-law was there, my wife's youngest sister. She was working with a medical NGO." Michael stared at him in shock. "What?" Marcus nodded grimly. "I never told anyone in the unit. Conflict of interest. Could have been relieved of duty. But when we got the intel about Taliban activity in that area, I knew she was there. That's why I pushed so hard during the briefing to expand our patrol route to include Kayaki." The revelation landed like a physical blow. Michael had made his decision to disobey withdrawal orders based purely on the immediate situation, civilians in danger, including women and children. He had never known there was a personal connection for one of his Marines. "You should have told me," he said finally, "and put you in an impossible position." Marcus shook his head. "You were my commanding officer. You needed to make tactical decisions without that kind of pressure." He met Michael's gaze directly. "But when you made the call to go in against orders, I've never felt more grateful to serve under any officer." "Did she make it out?" Michael asked, realizing he didn't know the outcome for every civilian they had evacuated that day. "She did," Marcus confirmed. "Got back to the States a month later. She's teaching nursing at UPenn now." He paused, then added quietly, "She has 2 kids. Neither would exist if you had followed those withdrawal orders." The weight of this information settled over Michael. Lives saved, futures created, all stemming from a decision that had effectively ended his military career when he refused commendation for an action that headquarters had officially frowned upon. Sarah returned from helping the other nomads clear debris further down the ditch, interrupting the moment. "Mr. Peterson brought cookies," she announced. "Chocolate chip." The work continued throughout the afternoon. Teams finished their initial assignments and moved on to other damaged areas. The nomads operated with impressive efficiency, their military training evident in how they approached each task, methodically established clear objectives, and executed their plans with minimal wasted effort. Word of their effectiveness spread faster than news of their outlaw appearance had the previous night. Residents who had initially called the sheriff in alarm now brought cold drinks and sandwiches. Children who had been kept indoors for safety were now watching in fascination as leather-clad bikers with tattoos and beards carefully repaired playground equipment and cleared debris from yards. Not everyone was won over. Karen Winters and a group of like-minded residents maintained their distance and their disapproval. Michael observed them watching from the corner of Cedar and Main, their expressions thunderous as a team of nomads efficiently cleared a downed power line from the street so utility workers could safely approach to restore electricity. By late afternoon, the transformation was remarkable. Streets that had been littered with branches and debris were clear. Damaged structures had been repaired or at least stabilized until professional contractors could take over. The community center was ready for Monday's senior lunch program. Mrs. Wilson had a new, sturdier porch. The elementary school playground was safe for children again. The nomads regrouped at Michael's garage, tired but satisfied with their day's work. Local residents who had worked alongside them or benefited from their help stopped by to offer thanks. Even Sheriff Jenkins made an appearance, his initial wariness replaced by grudging respect. "Have to admit," he told Michael quietly, "I didn't see this coming. They've done good work today." "They're good men," Michael replied. "Veterans who found another way to serve." Jenkins nodded thoughtfully. "Changes the picture somewhat." He glanced toward where Karen Winters and her group still maintained their vigil from a distance. Though not for everyone. As if summoned by their attention, Karen chose that moment to approach, flanked by Bill Thornton and two other town council members. Her face was set in lines of determination, her posture rigid with indignation. The small crowd of grateful residents parted to let her through, conversation dying as people sensed confrontation approaching. "Michael Hayes," Karen announced loudly, ensuring everyone could hear. "The town council has convened an emergency session this morning to address the situation here." Michael stepped forward to meet her, his expression neutral but alert. "What situation would that be, Karen?" "The storm damage these men have been helping to repair." Karen's lips thinned at his deliberate obtuseness. "The situation of harboring known criminals in our town, of exposing our community to elements that threaten our safety and property values." A murmur ran through the gathered crowd. Michael noted that the reaction was mixed. Some nodded in agreement with Karen, but others frowned, looking from her to the nomads who had spent the day helping their neighbors. "No crimes have been committed here," Michael said evenly. "No threats made, only assistance offered and given." "That's not the point," Karen insisted. "These people have records, arrests. They're members of an organization the FBI classifies as a criminal enterprise." Marcus stepped forward to stand beside Michael. "Ma'am," he said with deliberate courtesy, "most of us are also veterans who served our country honorably. Many of us came home with wounds visible and invisible. The club gave us purpose and brotherhood when civilian society had little use for our particular skill sets." Karen faltered momentarily at his respectful tone and unexpected eloquence, but quickly recovered. "Your past service, while appreciated, doesn't erase your current associations or actions. The fact remains that the Devil's nomads are not welcome in Pinecrest." "Speak for yourself, Karen," a new voice interrupted. Ray Blackburn, the fire chief, pushed through the crowd to join the confrontation. "These men have done more for this town today than your committee has done all year." Karen bristled. "Chief Blackburn, this is a town council matter." "Is it?" Blackburn challenged. "Seems to me it's a community matter, and I'm part of this community. Have been for 60 years, which is about 40 years longer than you." He looked around at the gathered residents. "Anyone here want to complain about the help they received today from these gentlemen?" Silence met his question. Even those who had been standing with Karen seemed unwilling to deny the good that had been done. "See, that's what I thought," Blackburn continued. "Judge people by their actions, not by their patches or their pasts." He turned to Marcus. "Far as I'm concerned, you and your men are welcome in Pinecrest anytime." A murmur of agreement rippled through the crowd, growing stronger as more residents found the courage to side publicly with the fire chief. Karen looked around in dismay as her support visibly eroded. "This isn't over," she told Michael stiffly. "The council will be discussing your business license and zoning compliance very thoroughly at our next meeting." The threat was clear, but Michael found he wasn't concerned. He had faced worse than small-town politics. "You do what you feel you need to, Karen. My door stays open to those who need shelter, regardless of their patches or their politics." Karen turned and stalked away, her remaining supporters trailing behind her. The gathered crowd watched her go, then turned back to the nomads with a new appreciation in their eyes. Blackburn's public stand had given others permission to acknowledge what they had witnessed. With their own eyes, these men, whatever their appearance or reputation, had served their community when help was needed. Marcus watched this transformation with a mixture of surprise and satisfaction. "Didn't expect to win over the whole town," he said quietly to Michael. "You haven't," Michael replied honestly, "but you've given them something to think about. Sometimes that's enough to start changing minds." As the afternoon waned toward evening, the nomads prepared once more to depart. Their emergency supplies used throughout the day were repacked and secured to their motorcycles. The grateful residents who had gathered brought food and drinks for their journey, a stark contrast to the fearful avoidance of the previous night. Sarah, exhausted but happy from a day spent helping alongside adults who treated her as a capable contributor rather than a child to be protected, sat on the garage steps watching the preparations. Marcus approached and knelt before her. "Miss Hayes," he said formally, "the Devil's Nomads are in your debt. Your hospitality and your hard work today have earned our respect." Sarah beamed at the adult treatment. "You're welcome, Mr. Stone. Will you come back sometime?" Marcus glanced up at Michael, who had joined them. "With your father's permission, perhaps we will." From his jacket, Marcus withdrew a red bandana with the Devil's Nomads insignia embroidered upon it. But Michael noticed something different about this particular patch. Where the standard logo featured crossbones beneath the snarling wolf's head, this one had white angel wings instead. "This is for you," Marcus told Sarah, offering the bandana. "For the bravest young lady I've ever had the honor to work with." Sarah took the gift reverently. "Really for me?" "Really," Marcus confirmed. "You wear that with pride. It marks you as a friend of the Nomads forever." Sarah impulsively hugged Marcus, catching the gruff biker off guard. After a moment's hesitation, he returned the embrace gently, his eyes suspiciously bright when he pulled away. As the sun began to set, the nomads mounted their motorcycles. The gathered townspeople stood in respectful silence as engines roared to life. Marcus, the last to mount up, approached Michael one final time. "I never properly thanked you," he said, extending his hand, "for Kayaki, for last night, for today." Michael shook the offered hand firmly. "No thanks needed. We're Marines. We take care of our own." Marcus smiled, a genuine expression that transformed his hard features. Once a Marine, always a Marine. He reached into his jacket and withdrew something that gleamed silver in the fading light. A dog tag. "I want you to have this," he said, pressing it into Michael's palm. "Had it made after Kaaki. Never felt worthy to wear it until now." Michael looked down at the tag. It was similar to his own, but inscribed with different words, "Honor shared, fear none." "Wear it alongside your father's," Marcus said, "as a reminder that you're not alone in believing some principles are worth standing for regardless of the cost." Michael closed his hand around the tag, deeply moved. "I will." With a final nod, Marcus mounted his motorcycle and led his men in a precise formation out of the garage lot and down the main street of Pinecrest. The townspeople who had gathered watched them go, many waving, some merely observing thoughtfully. A transformation had occurred today, not just in how the town viewed the nomads, but in how some residents viewed themselves and their assumptions. Sarah stood beside her father, the red bandana tied around her wrist, waving enthusiastically as the last motorcycle disappeared around the corner. The rumble of engines faded gradually until only the normal evening sounds of the small town remained. "They're good men, aren't they, Dad?" Sarah asked, looking up at her father. Michael nodded, his hand still closed around Marcus's gift. "Yes, they are. Men who found a way to keep serving even when they took off the uniform." As father and daughter turned to go inside, Michael noticed Ray Blackburn approaching, accompanied by several other town residents, including Ron Miller and Dave Chen, the veterans who had provided the screening barricade that morning. "Hayes," Blackburn called. "Got a minute?" Michael nodded, curious about what could bring this delegation to his door after such an eventful day. "We've been talking," Blackburn continued, gesturing to the men with him, "about what happened today, about what we saw." "And," Michael prompted when the fire chief paused. And we think Pinecrest could use more of what we saw today. Community service, veterans helping veterans, neighbors looking out for each other beyond the usual church groups and official channels. Blackburn looked Michael directly in the eye. We'd like you to help us organize something. A more formal program, maybe, building on what your nomad friends showed us is possible. Michael was surprised by the request. You want me to lead a community service initiative? Who better? Blackburn asked simply. You've got the military background to organize it, the technical skills to direct it, and after today, the moral authority to inspire it. Michael considered the proposal. He had kept largely to himself since moving to Pinecrest, focused on his business and raising Sarah. The idea of taking a more active role in the community, especially in a way that might help fellow veterans, was appealing. Yet he was aware that not everyone in town would welcome his increased visibility, especially after today's events. As if reading his thoughts, Dave Chen spoke up. Karen Winters doesn't speak for all of us. Never has. She's just louder than most. And getting quieter by the minute after today, Ron Miller added with a grin. Nothing shuts down self-righteousness faster than being publicly wrong. Michael looked at the men before him, seeing genuine respect and invitation in their expressions. Then he glanced down at Sarah, who was watching the exchange with bright, interested eyes. What do you think, kiddo? He asked her. Should we get more involved in town business? Yes, she said without hesitation. Then maybe more people like Mr. Stone and his friends will visit us. The simple logic of a child cutting through adult complexities to the heart of what mattered. Michael smiled and turned back to Blackburn and his delegation. I'd be honored to help, he said. Where do we start? As the men began discussing possibilities, Michael felt the weight of both dog tags against his chest. Honor before fear from his father. Honor shared fear none from Marcus. Different words expressing the same core truth that had guided him through war and peace. That principles matter, that courage isn't the absence of fear, but the triumph over it, and that sometimes the bravest act isn't charging into battle, but opening a door when everyone else is shutting theirs. The storm had passed, leaving Pinecrest changed in ways no one could have predicted when the first raindrops fell. And Michael Hayes, who had sought only a quiet life for himself and his daughter, found himself at the center of that change, called once more to lead, to serve, to stand for something larger than himself. It wasn't the mission he had expected, but then the most important missions rarely were. The next morning dawned clear and bright over Pinecrest, as if the storm had never happened. But evidence of both destruction and renewal remained throughout the small town. Fallen branches had been neatly stacked along curbs. Temporary patches covered damaged roofs. New lumber gleamed raw and bright on Mrs. Wilson's reconstructed porch. And perhaps most tellingly, a hand-painted sign had appeared overnight at the town limits. Pinecrest welcomes all who serve. Michael Hayes stood on his garage forecourt, coffee mug in hand, contemplating this new day. The Devil's nomads had departed the previous evening, leaving behind more than repaired storm damage. They had planted seeds of change in the town's perception of outsiders and in Michael's own sense of belonging. For the first time since moving to Pinecrest 5 years ago, he felt a genuine connection forming with the community beyond mere residence. Sarah burst from the apartment, backpack slung over one shoulder, the Red Devil's nomad's bandana proudly tied around her wrist. Ready for school, Dad? Michael smiled at her enthusiasm. Breakfast first, school second. As they shared a simple meal of cereal and toast, Sarah chattered excitedly about her plans to tell her classmates about working with the bikers. Michael listened with half an ear, his thoughts on the proposal Ray Blackburn had made the previous evening. A community service initiative led by Michael, building on what the nomads had demonstrated was possible. It was both appealing and daunting. Do you think Mr. Stone will come back to visit? Sarah asked, interrupting his thoughts. I imagine he might someday, Michael replied carefully. They travel a lot helping people. Like superheroes, Sarah nodded sagely, but with motorcycles instead of capes. The description brought a smile to Michael's face. Something like that. After dropping Sarah at school, where he noted the curious glances from other parents who had undoubtedly heard about the events of the weekend, Michael returned to his garage to catch up on work that had been postponed during the storm. He was beneath a Ford F-150 with a suspension problem when a shadow fell across the concrete floor. Michael Hayes. The voice was unfamiliar. Michael rolled out from under the truck to find an elderly man in a crisp button-down shirt and pressed slacks standing in the garage entrance. Despite being well into his 70s, he stood ramrod straight, his bearing unmistakably military. That's me, Michael confirmed, wiping his hands on a shop rag as he stood. Harold Reynolds, the man introduced himself, extending a weathered hand. United States Army, retired. Served in Desert Storm as a combat engineer. Before that, Iraq-Iran border monitoring in the 80s. Michael shook the offered hand, noting the firm grip. Michael Hayes, Marine Corps, Afghanistan. Reynolds nodded as if confirming something to himself. I know who you are, son. The whole town's talking about you and your biker friends. He glanced around the garage with an appraising eye. Good setup you have got here, organized, efficient. Thank you, Michael replied, curious about this unexpected visit. What can I do for you, Mr. Reynolds? Reynolds fixed him with a direct gaze. I was there yesterday. Watched those nomad fellows helping clear debris over on Maple Street. Saw how they worked. Disciplined, coordinated, like a military unit. He paused, then added, saw how they followed your lead too, like you were still wearing bars on your collar. Michael remained silent, waiting for the point. Ray Blackburn tells me you're thinking of setting up some kind of community service program, Reynolds continued. Veterans helping out after emergencies, that sort of thing. We discussed it, Michael acknowledged. Nothing definite yet. Reynolds nodded. Well, I'm here to tell you it's a damn good idea and to offer my assistance. He straightened even further if that was possible. There are 26 veterans living in Pinecrest. Most keep to themselves, same as you've been doing. But after watching yesterday, I made some calls. 17 of them are interested in what you're planning. Michael was taken aback. 17. So far, Reynolds confirmed with a hint of satisfaction. Would have been more, but I couldn't reach everyone yet. Point is, you're not alone, Hayes. Not in your service and not in your willingness to serve again. The revelation that so many veterans live quietly in Pinecrest surprised Michael. He had known about a few like Ray Blackburn and the men who had stood with him yesterday, but 17 ready to join an initiative that was barely more than a concept. I appreciate that, Mr. Reynolds, he said carefully. But this is still just an idea. No formal plans yet. Reynolds smiled for the first time, a brief crinkle of weathered features. Son, in my experience, the best operations start with a good idea and motivated personnel. The plans develop as you go. He reached into his pocket and withdrew a folded paper. Here's my contact information along with the names of the others who expressed interest. We're ready when you are. Michael accepted the list, scanning the names. Some he recognized as customers or familiar faces around town. Others were completely unknown to him. All had been living in the same small community, their shared experience of military service, an invisible bond waiting to be activated. I'll be in touch, Michael promised, tucking the paper into his shirt pocket. Reynolds nodded once mission accomplished. Good man. Oh, and Hayes, that girl of yours. She did you proud yesterday, working alongside grown men, not complaining, doing what needed doing. You're raising her right. With that parting comment, he turned and walked away, leaving Michael to ponder this unexpected development. The seed planted by the nomads was already sprouting in ways he couldn't have anticipated. Later that afternoon, Michael arrived early at the elementary school to pick up Sarah. He waited in the parent pickup line, noticing again the glances from other parents. Some were curious, others wary. A few offered friendly nods. The events of the weekend had clearly positioned him differently in the community consciousness, for better or worse. When Sarah emerged from the building, she was chatting animatedly with her teacher, Mrs. Abernathy, a middle-aged woman with a reputation for strictness, tempered by genuine care for her students. To Michael's surprise, Mrs. Abernathy accompanied Sarah to the pickup line. Mr. Hayes, she called, signaling for him to pull over rather than simply collecting Sarah. Do you have a moment? Michael parked and stepped out of his truck, wondering if Sarah had gotten into some kind of trouble related to her weekend adventures. Dad? Sarah exclaimed, bouncing with excitement. Mrs. Abernathy wants to invite you to Career Day. The teacher smiled at Sarah's enthusiasm. That's right. We have a Career Awareness Day coming up next month. Parents visit to talk about their jobs and life experiences. Sarah was quite insistent that you would be perfect. Michael glanced at his daughter, who was practically vibrating with pride. I'm just a mechanic, he said to Mrs. Abernathy. Not sure how exciting that would be compared to doctors or pilots. Mrs. Abernathy's expression grew more serious. Sarah tells me you're a Marine veteran who served multiple tours in Afghanistan, and that this weekend you coordinated a town-wide disaster response operation with military precision. She smiled slightly. I think our students might find that extremely educational, especially given how many come from military families themselves. Michael was caught off guard by the directness of her reference to his service in the weekend's events. In the 5 years Sarah had attended Pinecrest Elementary, He had interacted with teachers only minimally, keeping his background private. Now it seemed things were changing. "Please, Dad," Sarah pleaded, looking up at him with hopeful eyes. "Everyone's talking about the bikers and how you helped the town. Tyler's mom says you're a hero, again." The "again" caught at Michael's heart. Sarah had always viewed his military service with uncomplicated pride despite knowing little of the complexities and costs involved. Now she was connecting that past identity with his present actions, creating a continuity of character he hadn't fully recognized himself. "I'd be happy to participate," he told Mrs. Abernathy. "Just let me know when." The teacher's smile warmed. "Wonderful, and Mr. Hayes, what you did this weekend, opening your door when others were closing theirs, that's the kind of citizenship lesson no classroom could ever teach as effectively. Thank you." As they drove home, Sarah bubbled over with accounts of her day. "Everyone wanted to know about the bikers. I showed them my bandana, and Joey said his dad said they were criminals. But I told him they're veterans who help people after storms, and my dad knows them because he was a hero in Afghanistan too." Michael listened with a mixture of amusement and concern. "Sarah, it's important to remember that people are complicated. The nomads have had troubles with the law, even though they also do good things." Sarah considered this, like how you disobeyed orders to save people. Was that against the law too? The innocent question struck home. "Military law is different from civilian law," he explained carefully. "But yes, technically I disobeyed a direct order. Sometimes doing the right thing means breaking the rules." "Is that what honor before fear means?" Michael glanced at his perceptive daughter. "Partly. It means doing what you believe is right, even when it's difficult or scary, even when there might be consequences." Sarah nodded seriously. "Like when you let the bikers stay even though the neighbors were mad." Exactly like that. When they arrived home, Michael was surprised to find Sheriff Jenkins' patrol car parked in front of the garage. The sheriff himself leaned against the hood, his expression unreadable. "Stay into the truck for a minute," Michael told Sarah as he parked. To Jenkins, he called, "Problem, Sheriff." Jenkins straightened. "No problem, just an update you should be aware of." He glanced at Sarah, who was watching curiously from the truck. "Maybe somewhere private." Michael nodded toward the garage. Once inside, with Sarah still waiting in the vehicle, Jenkins got straight to the point. "Thought you should know. We had visitors early this morning, the Vipers." Michael tensed. "The rival club that showed up yesterday?" "The same," Jenkins confirmed. "They were asking around town about the nomads. Where they went, when they left. Specific questions about Marcus Stone." "Sounds like unfinished business," Michael observed. Jenkins nodded grimly. "That's how I read it too. I encouraged them to move on, which they did. For now. But I wanted to give you a heads up, given your connection to Stone and his crew." "Appreciated," Michael said. "You think they'll be back?" "Hard to say. Motorcycle clubs take their rivalries seriously. Whatever happened in Rockport between the Nomads and Vipers isn't likely to be forgotten quickly." Jenkins studied Michael's face. "If Stone contacts you, you might want to warn him." Michael nodded, understanding the subtext. Jenkins wasn't here officially documenting contact with a known outlaw motorcycle club. He was here as one man warning another of potential danger. "I'll keep an eye out," Michael assured him. As Jenkins turned to leave, he paused. "By the way, I hear Ray Blackburn and Harold Reynolds are rounding up veterans for some kind of community project." "Your idea. More of a group effort," Michael replied carefully. Jenkins smiled slightly. "Well, for what it's worth, I think it's a good one. Town could use more of what we saw yesterday and less of Karen Winter's committee meetings." After the sheriff departed, Michael waved Sarah in from the truck. His mind was processing the warning about the Vipers. If they were looking for Marcus and the Nomads with bad intentions, it could mean trouble down the road. For now, though, he had no way to contact Marcus directly. The Nomads traveled off-grid, avoiding the digital trails that define most modern lives. The next few days fell into a new pattern. Michael's auto repair business saw an uptick in customers, many of whom made a point of mentioning how impressed they were with the weekend's events. Harold Reynolds stopped by daily, bringing more names of interested veterans and increasingly detailed ideas for what he referred to as the Pinecrest Service Corps. By Thursday, Michael had agreed to host an informal meeting at his garage on Saturday morning. Reynolds and Blackburn had spread the word, and the list of attendees had grown beyond just veterans to include other community members who had been impressed by the Nomads' example. Sarah, meanwhile, had become something of a minor celebrity at school. Her first-hand account of working alongside the Devil's Nomads had transformed from potentially controversial to surprisingly admired. The red bandana with its modified insignia became her constant accessory, a badge of distinction among her peers. On Friday afternoon, as Michael was closing up the garage, he heard the unmistakable rumble of a motorcycle approaching. His first thought was of the Vipers and Jenkins' warning, but the engine note was wrong. This was a single bike, not a group. A gleaming Harley-Davidson pulled into the garage forecourt. The rider wore the now familiar leather jacket of the Devil's Nomads, but it wasn't Marcus Stone. This rider was younger, with the scar along his jaw that Michael recalled from the group that had sheltered during the storm. As the young man cut the engine and removed his helmet, Michael recognized him as Jason Briggs, one of the nomads who had helped repair the elementary school playground. "Mr. Hayes," Briggs greeted him respectfully. "Hope I'm not intruding." "Not at all," Michael assured him. "Everything all right?" Briggs glanced around as if checking for observers before answering. "Marcus sent me. We got word the Vipers have been asking about us in Pinecrest. Wanted to make sure you and your daughter weren't catching any blowback." Michael was touched by the concern. "We're fine. Sheriff gave me a heads up earlier this week." Briggs nodded, relieved. "Good. Marcus would have come himself, but we're working flood relief in Grantsville. Pretty bad situation over there." "How can I help?" Michael asked, recognizing the underlying purpose of the visit. Briggs smiled briefly. "Direct, just like Marcus said you'd be." He reached into his jacket and withdrew a sealed envelope. "This is for you. Contact information in case you ever need to reach us. Secure channels only, no digital trails." Michael accepted the envelope, understanding its significance. The nomads weren't just checking on his welfare. They were establishing a permanent connection. "There's something else," Briggs continued. "Marcus asked me to tell you we've been thinking about what happened here. How the town changed once they saw us working instead of just judging our patches. He's talking with the club leadership about making it more official, creating specialized teams for disaster response, getting proper training, maybe even coordination with official agencies eventually." "Sounds like a natural evolution," Michael observed. "It is," Briggs agreed, "but he also said something else. Said that sometimes it takes an outsider to see what a community really needs. And sometimes it takes someone like you, who's both insider and outsider, to help build the bridge." He looked directly at Michael. "The veterans in Pinecrest, Marcus thinks you could do something similar here. Something important." Michael thought of the meeting scheduled for tomorrow morning, of Harold Reynolds' list of names, of Ray Blackburn's proposal. The pieces were aligning in a way that felt significant, guided by an unseen hand. "Already in motion," he told Briggs. The young biker smiled, a genuine expression that transformed his scarred face. "Marcus said you'd be way ahead of us." He started his motorcycle again. "One more thing. There's a kid at the elementary school, Jimmy Winters. His dad was 10th Mountain Division, killed in action in 2014. Mom's on the town council, kind of a hard case." Michael blinked in surprise. "Karen Winters has a son, and her husband was military." Briggs nodded solemnly. "Marcus thought you should know. Sometimes the loudest critics are carrying the heaviest burdens." With that cryptic parting message, he roared away, leaving Michael to process this unexpected revelation. Karen Winters, the most vocal opponent of the nomads and of Michael's decision to shelter them, was a military widow raising a son alone. The knowledge recontextualized her hostility in ways that demanded reconsideration. Saturday morning arrived clear and cool. Michael had rearranged the garage to accommodate the meeting, setting up folding chairs in a rough circle. Sarah had insisted on making cookies, viewing this gathering as an extension of the nomads' visit and her role as hospitality provider. By 9 o'clock, the garage was full. 23 veterans ranging in age from mid-20s to early 80s sat or stood in attentive silence. Ray Blackburn and Harold Reynolds had positioned themselves near Michael, forming a natural leadership triangle. Additionally, 8 civilian community members had come, including Dave Chen from the diner and Ron Miller from the hardware store, both of whom had provided the screening barricade during the confrontation with the Vipers. "Thanks for coming," Michael began simply. "What happened last weekend showed us something important. This town has needs that aren't being fully met by existing services. And it has resources, human resources specifically, that aren't being fully utilized." Nods of agreement circulated through the group. "Many of us served," Michael continued. "Different branches, different eras, different campaigns. But we all understand mission duty and the unique skills military service develops. Organization, logistics, crisis response, teamwork under pressure. And not being afraid to get our hands dirty," added an older veteran near the back, triggering appreciative chuckles. "Exactly," Michael agreed. What the Devil's Nomads demonstrated wasn't just community service. It was a particular approach to service, efficient, coordinated, effective, without bureaucracy or committees or paperwork. Like the military at its best, Harold Reynolds interjected, and unlike civilian government at its worst. More chuckles and nods. So here's the proposal, Michael said, getting to the heart of the matter. We establish a volunteer corps of veterans and civilian allies. We develop response plans for various emergencies. We inventory skills and equipment. We train together. And when something happens, we don't wait for official channels. We respond immediately and effectively. Like a civilian quick reaction force, suggested a middle-aged man Michael recognized as a former Army Ranger. Exactly like that, Michael confirmed, but not just for emergencies, for ongoing needs too. Elderly residents who need home repairs, single parents who need childcare during medical treatments, veterans struggling with VA bureaucracy who need advocates. The concept resonated visibly among the gathered attendees. Veterans sat straighter, eyes brightening with purpose. Civilians nodded thoughtfully, seeing the potential beyond the initial storm response that had sparked the idea. For the next 2 hours, they developed the framework. Teams based on skills and availability, communication protocols, resource inventories, training schedules. Throughout the discussion, Michael was struck by how naturally the group fell into productive collaboration, each person contributing based on their strengths without ego or posturing. This, he realized, was what he had missed since leaving the Corps. Not the danger or the hardship, but the pure functionality of a group united by common purpose and mutual respect. These men and women, regardless of age or branch of service, spoke a common language and operated from shared values: honor, duty, service, efficiency. As the meeting was drawing to a conclusion, an unexpected visitor arrived. Sheriff Jenkins stepped into the garage, surveying the gathered group with professional interest. "Hope I'm not interrupting," he said when conversation paused at his entrance. "Not at all," Michael assured him. "We were just wrapping up our first planning session." Jenkins nodded, then addressed the group. "Wanted to let you know officially that the Sheriff's Department supports this initiative. We've got limited resources and a large area to cover. Having trained organized citizens ready to assist benefits everyone." He glanced specifically at Michael. "As long as everything stays within legal boundaries, you'll have no interference from us. Might even have some coordination where appropriate." The official endorsement was significant. Michael understood that Jenkins was extending not just approval, but protection. By publicly aligning with this veteran-led initiative, he was providing political cover against potential opposition from figures like Karen Winters. "Appreciated, Sheriff," Michael acknowledged. "We'll stay in our lane." As the meeting disbanded and people began to leave, Ray Blackburn approached Michael privately. "Good work today, Hayes. This has potential beyond what most of them realize yet." "How do you mean?" Michael asked. Blackburn's weathered face grew serious. "Communities like Pinecrest are dying all across rural America. Young people leave for cities. Services get cut. Infrastructure crumbles. Social bonds fray." He gestured to the departing veterans. "But these men and women represent something that still works. Service, sacrifice, looking out for your people, building something bigger than yourself." Michael nodded, understanding. This wasn't just about disaster response or community service. It was about revitalization through purpose and connection. "One more thing," Blackburn added. "I received a call yesterday from Karen Winters." Michael tensed slightly. "And?" "She wants to meet with you. Privately." Blackburn studied Michael's face. "I think you should hear her out." Michael thought of what Briggs had told him about Karen Winters' personal history. A military widow raising a son alone. Perhaps there was more to her opposition than mere small-town politics. "I'll reach out to her," he agreed. Later that afternoon, and after the garage had emptied and Sarah had gone to a friend's house for a sleepover, Michael sat alone in his small office. The day's events had left him energized but thoughtful. The initiative was taking shape faster than he had anticipated, gathering momentum from the community's hunger for exactly this kind of purposeful connection. The sound of a car pulling up outside interrupted his reflections. Through the window, he saw Karen Winters' silver Volvo parking beside his truck. She sat behind the wheel for a long moment, seemingly gathering resolve before finally emerging and approaching the garage with stiff-backed determination. Michael met her at the entrance. "Mrs. Winters," he greeted her neutrally. "Mr. Hayes," she returned with equal formality. "Thank you for seeing me without an appointment. Please come in." He led her to the small office where 2 chairs faced each other across a simple desk. Karen sat perched on the edge of her seat, hands clasped tightly in her lap. Up close, Michael could see signs of strain in her face that hadn't been apparent during their confrontation days earlier. Fine lines around her eyes, tension in her jaw, the subtle markers of chronic stress. "I'll come straight to the point," she began. "I've heard about your Veterans Initiative. Ray Blackburn is quite enthusiastic about it." Michael nodded but remained silent, waiting for her to continue. "Initially, I was concerned. After the incident with those bikers, I worried you were becoming a disruptive influence in our community." She paused, clearly choosing her words carefully. "But I've been forced to reconsider certain assumptions." "What changed?" Michael asked simply. Karen's composure cracked slightly. "My son Jimmy, he's in 5th grade at Pinecrest Elementary. Apparently your daughter has been quite vocal about your military service and the weekend's events." A small, reluctant smile appeared briefly. Jimmy came home full of questions about the Marines, about Afghanistan, about his father. Understanding dawned. "10th Mountain Division," Michael said quietly. "Killed in action 2014. Karen's eyes widened in surprise. "How did you know that?" "Word gets around," Michael replied, not wanting to reveal his source. "I'm sorry for your loss." She acknowledged this with a slight nod. "Robert and I met in college, ROTC. We both served, though I left the Army when Jimmy was born. Robert stayed in. He believed in what he was doing." Her voice caught slightly. "After he died, I needed structure, certainty. The town council provided that. Rules and procedures and committees." The revelation humanized her in ways Michael hadn't expected. Karen Winters wasn't simply a rigid bureaucrat enforcing small-town conformity. She was a military widow who had channeled her grief and need for control into civil service. "And now," he prompted gently. Karen straightened, recovering her composure. "Now I find myself reconsidering certain positions. This Veterans Initiative, it has merit, structure but with flexibility, purpose but without bureaucracy." She met his gaze directly. "Jimmy hasn't stopped talking about it since he heard. About how veterans are heroes who keep serving even without uniforms. How his father would have been part of it." Michael nodded, understanding the complicated emotions this would evoke in both mother and son. He would be welcome to learn about it, to know more about the kind of work his father did, the values he lived by. "That's why I'm here," Karen admitted, "not officially as a council member, but as Jimmy's mother, to ask if there might be a place for him, some way he could be involved appropriately for his age, to connect with that part of his father's life." The request surprised Michael, but its authenticity was unmistakable. This wasn't political maneuvering, but a parent's genuine concern for her child's emotional needs. "I think we could arrange something," he assured her. "When we're doing community projects training days, there could certainly be roles for young people, educational opportunities, ways to participate safely." Relief softened Karen's features. "Thank you," and she hesitated, then pushed forward. "Regarding the town council, I may have been hasty in certain comments and threats. Your business license is not in any jeopardy." Michael accepted the olive branch with a nod. Water under the bridge. As Karen rose to leave, she paused, seeming to debate internally before speaking again. "One last thing, Mr. Hayes. Those bikers, the devil's nomads, if they return to Pinecrest..." She took a deep breath. "The council will not oppose their presence provided they conduct themselves as they did during their last visit." It was as close to an apology and reversal as her pride would allow. Michael recognized both the concession it represented and its practical value for any future nomad visits. "I'll be sure they know," he said simply. After Karen departed, Michael sat for a long while contemplating the day's developments. The Veterans Initiative was taking shape, gaining official support from both the Sheriff's Department and indirectly the town council. The nomads had extended a permanent line of communication, and perhaps most surprisingly, his most vocal opponent had revealed herself to be a potential ally with her own connection to military service. That evening, as sunset painted the sky in shades of amber and gold, Michael stood on the small deck behind his apartment, both dog tags hanging outside his shirt for once. His father's original tag with honor before fear. Marcus Stone's gift with honor shared fear none. He thought about the strange winding path that had led him here, from his father's service to his own in Afghanistan. From the fateful decision in Kajaki village to the storm that had brought Marcus Stone back into his life. From isolation in Pinecrest to emerging leadership in a community initiative. None of it had been planned. None of it had been expected. Yet somehow all of it felt right, as if the various threads of his life were finally weaving together into a coherent pattern. His phone buzzed with a text message from Sarah at her sleepover. Having fun. Jamie's mom says you're a hero like her dad was. Is that true? Michael smiled at the simple question with its complicated answer. He thought of what Marcus had said through Briggs, that sometimes it takes someone who is both insider and outsider to build necessary bridges. Perhaps that was the role he had been preparing for all along, through military service and civilian life, through battle decisions and everyday choices. Building bridges, connecting people, creating paths where none had existed before. He texted back, her dad was definitely a hero. I'm just a mechanic who tries to do what's right. Sarah's response came quickly. That's what heroes do, Dad. Love you. Michael smiled and tucked the phone away, his gaze returning to the sunset. In the distance, he could hear the community center bell tolling 6 o'clock. Lights were coming on in houses throughout Pinecrest as families gathered for dinner. Life continuing in its ordinary rhythms, yet subtly changed by recent events. 3 months ago, he had been a quiet mechanic raising his daughter alone, keeping largely to himself. Now he stood at the center of a growing network of veterans and community members bound together by shared purpose and renewed connection. All because a storm had forced 15 leather-clad bikers to seek shelter, and Michael had remembered the words that had guided 3 generations of Hayes men honor before fear. Sometimes he reflected the most important journeys begin with simply opening a door. A week later, the newly formed Pinecrest Service Corps held its first official training day. 37 veterans and 22 civilian volunteers gathered at the community center, which had been repaired by the Devil's Nomads during their visit. They inventoried skills, established communication protocols, and assigned team leaders for different emergency scenarios. Sarah was there, proudly wearing her red bandana, assisting Jimmy Winters in setting up a display about military branches and specialties. Karen Winters watched from a distance, her face showing a complex mixture of pride, grief, and cautious hope. Michael moved among the groups, answering questions, offering suggestions, connecting people with complementary skills. He had found his role not as an authoritarian leader, but as a facilitator, helping others discover how their unique abilities could serve the greater whole. As the day's activities were concluding, a familiar rumble approached from the distance. Motorcycle engines, multiple bikes growing louder. Conversations paused, heads turned. Michael stepped outside to see 15 Harley-Davidsons rolling toward the community center, their riders wearing the now familiar leather jackets with the Devil's Nomads insignia. Marcus Stone led the formation, his beard freshly trimmed, but his eyes as watchful as ever. He brought the group to a halt before the community center steps where Michael stood waiting. For a moment, the 2 men regarded each other in silence. The veteran Marine officer and the former Lance Corporal, whose paths had crossed in Afghanistan, diverged and improbably reconverged in a small Oregon town during a storm. Heard you started something interesting here, Hayes, Marcus said, dismounting. Thought we might stop by and see it for ourselves. Michael smiled, extending his hand. Good timing. We were just finishing our first training day. Marcus shook the offered hand, then gestured to his companions. Brought a few resources you might find useful. Equipment, expertise, contacts with similar groups in other regions. Behind Marcus, the other nomads began unloading packages and equipment cases from their motorcycles. Michael recognized emergency medical supplies, communications gear, and specialized tools for disaster response. We're establishing forward operating bases throughout the Pacific Northwest, Marcus explained. Caches of equipment and trained personnel ready to respond to disasters without waiting for official channels. What you're building here in Pinecrest fits perfectly into the network. Michael understood immediately. The nomads were formalizing their disaster relief activities, creating an alternative response system that operated parallel to, but independent from official agencies. The Pinecrest Service Corps could be one node in a larger regional network, multiplying its effectiveness through coordination and shared resources. We should talk details, Michael suggested, leading Marcus toward the community center where the others were waiting. I think you'll find we've got a solid foundation to build on. As they reached the entrance, Sarah burst through the doors, her face lighting up at the sight of the nomads. Mr. Stone, you came back, she exclaimed, running straight to Marcus. Marcus knelt to greet her, his weathered face softening into a genuine smile. Couldn't stay away, Miss Hayes, especially when we heard what you and your dad were building here. Sarah proudly displayed her red bandana. I wear it every day. All the kids at school think it's cool now. As they should, Marcus agreed solemnly. It marks you as a friend of the nomads. And now, he gestured to the gathering inside, It looks like the nomads have even more friends in Pinecrest. Michael watched this exchange with a full heart. From the darkness of war to the uncertainty of civilian life, from isolation to community, from suspicion to acceptance. The journey had been long and often difficult. But standing here now, seeing these unlikely allies united in common purpose, he felt a peace he had not known since before his first deployment. His hand rose unconsciously to touch the two dog tags that hung against his chest. Honor before fear. Honor shared fear none. Not just words stamped in metal, but principles lived in action. Principles that had guided him through the most difficult decisions of his life and led him ultimately to this moment of unexpected homecoming. The storm had passed, but what it had revealed remained the enduring strength of honor, courage, and the bonds forged through shared service. Not just military service, but service to something greater than oneself. Service to community, to country, to the ideals that transcended uniforms and patches and the artificial boundaries people created between themselves. Come on inside, Michael said to Marcus and his men. There are some people you should meet, people who understand exactly what you've been building out there on the road. As the nomads entered the community center to curious but welcoming faces, Michael paused for a moment on the threshold. 5 years ago, he had come to Pinecrest seeking quiet anonymity after the trauma of war and personal loss. Instead, he had found a new mission and a new kind of family, one bound not by blood, but by shared values and common purpose. Perhaps, he reflected, this was what coming home truly meant. Not a physical place, but a state of belonging, of purpose, of connection to something larger than oneself. With that thought, he followed Marcus inside, ready to continue building the bridges that would connect past to future soldier, to civilian, neighbor to neighbor. The work of honor was never finished, but neither was it ever undertaken alone.